Hey folks, dusT here, and welcome to another edition of the Rapid Recap here at Rivalry, where we try to bring you some of the top stories from CSGO last week. At the top of the show, we hit you with the headlines so you can get in and out of here real fast, but if you want to, later on in the show, we give you the deeper details. So without further ado, let's get into those headlines. In the headlines for last week, we had WESG's 2017 Grand Finals taking place, with Fnatic winning yet another title. We also had the iBUYPOWER Spring Invitational taking place in North America this weekend, with Energy taking the title in an upset over Team Liquid. We've also gotten news from ESL that they've announced a new South American league, with the winner of that league getting a slot into the EPL Season 7 finals. And also, after a couple of weeks of silence, we now do have some more news from IEM Sydney. Also have a couple of more events coming up this week, with the V4 Future Sports Festival coming up in Hungary with a huge prize pool on the line, as well as a few top teams in attendance. We also have a partnership between Starladder and IMBATV announcing an $150,000 invitational, with several teams from the Asian region taking place, as well as some teams from Europe and the CIS. Back in the North American neck of the woods, we've had several teams in the lower end of the pro leagues making some changes to try to improve their stock going forward. And in some other news, we have the CSGO Player Union continuing to come together under the leadership of Sir Scoots, with some more information being released this past week. And we got some more news from Shox in a podcast, giving us more details about his thoughts on the situation over at G2. With that said, that is your headlines. If you'd like to stick around, though, we are going to give you the deeper details in the next segment of the show. So to get into some of the deeper details of last week's stories in CSGO, we'll kick things off by talking about the WESG World Finals for 2017 that completed this past week. Of course, the big story coming out of this was Fnatic being able to get themselves another title off the back of a win at IEM Katowice. In order to do this, Fnatic defeated Space Soldiers in the Grand Finals 2-1. It was a very close series, including the third map being a 16-14 win on Mirage. And also we did have Space Soldiers winning a game in overtime on Inferno. So certainly a tight race with these two teams in the finals. Fnatic's path to this, of course, included wins over MVP PK of Korea, as well as Team 1 of Brazil in the playoffs, as well as in the group stage getting wins over Cloud9, as well as a team from Spain, and a tie to AGO and Big. Crims winds up being the MVP of this event after having sick performances lately throughout this year, and even going into late last year. Just barely missed out on being an MVP at IEM Katowice, in my opinion. It was only because Flusha just really came through in the Grand Finals that stopped them from getting that MVP title there. And of course, we didn't really know what to expect from Fnatic at this event, because certainly news had come out the previous week that Golden was perhaps on his way out and Exist was on his way in, and a lot of people were left confused by this because of how well Fnatic had been doing under Golden's leadership. He seemed to be bringing some structure to the team, Krim seemed to be flourishing under the system he had provided, and other players were starting to step up as well. JW particularly had a really good event at IEM Katowice, and so it left a lot of people kind of scratching their heads on why this would happen. Now, certainly Exist would bring a lot of experience to the team. He certainly is a veteran of Counter-Strike. He's been playing it since its conception in CSGO at least, and has been a part of very many successful renditions of an IP, though lately they haven't been as successful, of course. And to some degree, people would say that he probably has a little bit more skill as a fragger compared to Golden. And so there are the pros and cons there. But again, it's still confusing to see Fnatic wanting to make a change to a team that has only been trending upwards lately. Yeah, they had the crash out at Starladder, but that seemed to be an outlier now when you consider the titles now at WESG and IEM Katowice, as well as some, good finishes at ECS and EPL, and at least maintaining legendary status in the major system at E-League Boston. But then after the tournament was over, a tweet came out from Golden saying that I'm staying. And so now we're left to wonder if, in fact, they are now not going to go with the move with Exist, if the success is just too much for them to, be able to legitimize the fact that they would be getting rid of Golden to bring in Exist, who, of course, has had his struggles lately within IP. So we'll just have to see how this story develops. This is certainly an interesting situation that Fnatic finds themselves in. You have to even wonder if maybe there's some resentment because Golden knows that he's on the chopping block, basically, if things start to go poorly. So it definitely could be awkward, could be some resentment there, could certainly make the situation interesting to follow going forward. Now, also from WSG, the other side of that, of course, is going to be the fact that Space Soldiers had a really good event. Of course, they wound up making the finals with wins over Russia and Godsent in the playoffs, as well as in the group stages getting wins over Order, Bravado, and Team 1 of Brazil. So they also had a pretty good event. We've had times in this team kind of come up and do really good things online. Some of their players are considered very skilled, such as Antares, but also Calyx, pretty solid. And it just seems like they're slowly growing something, and they have done some stuff in smaller offline events as well. And I mean, they didn't do too shabby at the last Major League Boston. They were very close to advancing and doing what they needed to do there. So this is certainly still a team to keep an eye on going forward from Turkey. And this WESG event, was definitely pretty solid for them. Now, some other big stories that come out of this event, some of them are going to be a little bit negative, I guess you could say, right? You had SK getting knocked out in the initial group stages with losses to Big in Russia. This is after they had an extended boot camp in Europe, and from all interviews that were out there, it seemed like they were really focused on this event. You know, they had to play the major, for example, with Phelps instead of Bolts, and before that, Bolts was playing on SK for, I think, 4 events, and they won 3 out of the 4, and they were looking really sharp with Bolts, and then after the major, though, they've really had their struggles, and it seemed like, from interviews we saw that they were having some internal issues, whether it be personal problems between players or maybe just personal issues that individuals were dealing with that were causing them not to play up to their normal level. They didn't really get into the details of that, but there seemed to be something going on between the players and the team based on what we were seeing come out from the team in different interviews. And so this is a real big disappointment for them to have put so much focus behind trying to solve those personal issues, to go through a boot camp, to try to fix things on the team, to be able to take this tournament. I mean, this should be a tournament where SK is certainly one of the favorites to make the playoffs. Certainly, at least a semi-finalist team. I mean, their main competition were teams like Fnatic and Cloud9, maybe Space Soldiers, and when you're not seeing the tournament in hindsight now going into it, this is what the thoughts were. And so this was certainly a big disappointment for the team, and you have to kind of wonder what's going to happen next right now. They just don't look like themselves, and it's crazy to see because for a while this team was, in the argument for being the best team in the world, and we're certainly a consistent top 4 team in the world, getting really, really good results, if not winning titles, certainly making deep runs. So this is definitely an odd time. This is probably the lowest the team has looked in a very, very long time. You have to go back probably to like early 2016, late 2015 to get to a point where the core of this team has struggled as much as they have to produce big results. So we'll have to see how things go forward with this team. Also, we did have Cloud9 getting upset in this tournament really early. Of course, they had a lot of hype behind them after doing pretty well in some tournaments to end 2017, and then, of course, winning the first major for North America over at E-League Boston. And since then, it's been kind of back and forth. They had a couple disappointing results. Summit wasn't too bad. At least they still made the finals and lost to an incoming Liquid team. Had a little bit of a bounce back at IEM Katowice after a rough time at Starladder, but this is certainly another big disappointment for them, getting knocked out in the quarterfinals by Team 1 in a 1-2 series. They looked fine in both group stages, and they looked pretty dominant in one map win over Team 1 in the series, but ultimately lost it. They were certainly a favorite to meet Fnatic in the semifinals, and then from there, it was kind of up in the air who would wind up taking it, just due to Fnatic's situation with Golden and Exist and all that going on, and Cloud9 looking shaky at times, but they don't even make it that far. And so, yeah, this is definitely a tough pill to swallow for Cloud9, and we'll have to see how they recover from it going forward. And just some quick finishing storylines for this. Not a bad tournament for MVPK from Korea, who also did pretty well in the groups and looked competitive in one of their maps against Fnatic, and were able to get a map win against Russia. So this was not a bad look for the Korean team, as they're going to be heading into that Starladder IMBAtv Invitational tournament, which we'll talk about later, and maybe some other stuff coming up. So definitely maybe a team to keep an eye on just a little bit. They certainly haven't built up any real hype yet, but at least they looked okay at this event. And I would say AGO also looked okay at this event. The team from Poland had a win over Big in the groups, as well as a map win over Fnatic, and also took a map off of Russia in the quarterfinals. Of course, it's a Polish team that has at times shown a little bit of promise. Certainly some of their players were at times candidates in many people's eyes to maybe replace someone in Virtus Pro or be like that second best team in Poland, especially with Pride kind of being ripped apart by moves that happened to Kingwin. So yeah, this is certainly maybe another team to keep an eye on going forward. And that is pretty much everything that was pretty big coming out of WESG last week. This past weekend also saw a tournament on North American soil, an online tournament, 16K prize pool, 10K going to first place, and that 10K went to Energy, which 2-0'd Team Liquid in the grand finals. This, combined with some really impressive results from Energy over in EPL and ECS, is really starting to make this team look like a team that we need to be paying attention to in the North American region. I mean, certainly teams like Liquid and Cloud9 and, SK, if they can recover, maybe this new Optic lineup that has a lot of, stars put on it, were certainly teams that were considered like big playoff contenders in North American pro leagues. But we were wondering who's going to fill that gap that's been left behind from some of the middle of the pack teams like CLG or Misfits. And Energy looked to be doing that, and maybe even more, maybe really being a playoff contender. And it'll be interesting to see how they transition to offline play, if we could see them at some DreamHack Open stops or just some different offline tournaments in general, because it seems like the core of Cirque, the new pickup Ethan, and then Breeze have been pretty reliable firepower for this team. And Fugly also hasn't done a bad job at being kind of a fourth player that can either be like the fourth best player on the team or at times slot in if someone's having an off game and produce numbers to help make sure the team has enough firepower to get them through games. Tactically, DAP seems to be doing pretty well with their new coach, Emmy. They've actually been a lot more faster paced in their play than DAP's teams in the past that were seen more reliant on defaults. They still do have that, of course, at their foundation, but we're seeing them throw in some crafty stuff. We're seeing Cirque be a really, dominant force with the AWP, very aggressive, looks to take initiative, definitely has that swagger about him that you would want in an opper, not afraid, to go for a fight, not shying away from, making plays when he's needed. And Ethan seems to be fitting in. And yeah, this team is looking really good in all their online results so far. So definitely interesting stuff coming out of Energy. Team Liquid did wind up making the finals as well this event and losing to Energy. Obviously this is a team that we still think is very powerful in the NA scene, especially after their run of tournaments, winning Summit, taking top 4 at IEM Katowice and Starladder. Still considered definitely probably the best North American team right now due to Cloud9 having their struggles and Liquid looking hot in their first offline events. But yeah, Energy gets a big win here, and so that's definitely something to talk about. We also had Torqued and Rogue making the playoffs of this tournament, or making the semifinals, I should say. It was just an 18 tournament, so everyone was in the playoffs. But we did have Torqued actually beating Complexity in the quarterfinals, and Rogue actually beat Luminosity in the quarterfinals. And Torqued looked really impressive in this event. They even had a really, really close map against Team Liquid in the semifinals on Cobblestone. Steel seems to be operating this team really well. They look really disciplined, really good utility usage, definitely some good executes, look really well coordinated. Steel's also fragging pretty well for an in-game leader, which sometimes in-game leaders struggle to do. You've seen different players step up on this team at different times. It's really been kind of Pollo and Kusta who have been the other big forces next to Steel. Swag's had a couple of off games here and there, but still usually dangerous, and AZK a little bit hit or miss. But certainly this team looks to be someone to keep an eye on. They're doing really good in Mountain Dew League, and this is a big result for them at this tournament. And certainly I expect to see them in pro leagues next season. I expect them to be able to either get auto-promoted by winning MDL or getting through regulation. Whatever the case may be, we should be looking at this team to be competing against some of the North American professional teams going forward. And then Rogue, not a bad result being able to beat Luminosity. They've had their struggles elsewhere, but certainly being able to get that win against Luminosity. For one, Gaman, their new rifler, seems to be fitting in really well. He seems to be playing pretty good. And so, definitely a step up whenever you compare Rogue to last year to what we're seeing from them now. Last week, we also got some more news out of ESL in regards to their EPL Season 7 finals when it comes to slot distribution. Of course, we already reported that Europe had gained a slot. Now they're at 7 slots for the finals, and then NA retained the 6 slots, despite the fact that their team list has been reduced just to 12 teams. So that's 13 of the slots that are going to be at the EPL finals. But it was also announced that 2 slots were going to be given to the Asian Pacific region via an event that's going to be held in Sydney. But we were still waiting to see what that last slot was going to be. We knew that there was one more slot left, and now it's been announced that it is going to be based on a South American league, and it's going to be called the ESL LA League, Latin America League, which will begin March 24th. And it will start with 2 open qualifiers featuring teams from all over South America. And then the leading teams of these 2 open qualifiers, 4 per region, will join 8 invited sides in a closed qualifier, which will run from March 30th to April 1st. And then the top 8 teams of those closed qualifiers will progress to the main stage, which will culminate on a grand final on May 5th. And the winner of this Latin America League will earn a spot at the EPL Finals, which of course is scheduled from May 14th through 20th. And to prevent last-minute replacements and all kinds of other issues, ESL will make it mandatory for the 8 teams competing in the main stage to have U.S. visas ready in case they were to win and they were to be able to travel over to Dallas for those finals. So again, this is just a little bit more news coming out on how this new season of EPL is shaping up as far as how their finals are going to work. We've had other details come out of the finals in previous editions of the Rapid Recap, so go check those out. And of course, you can be on the lookout for, ESL's official websites and social media to be able to get this information as well. Now, after a couple of weeks of not really hearing a whole heck of a lot, we finally got some more news about IEM Sydney. They have announced that they are going to be inviting Renegades, and this goes alongside FaZe and SK, who were already previously invited, so we now know 3 teams for sure for the event. We also had Stewie2K kind of slip up on Twitter and mention something about heading to Sydney, so perhaps Cloud9's invitation is on the way. He did quickly correct himself and talk about DreamHack Masters Marseille, but he might have slipped up a little bit there, but we'll have to see how it goes. Of course, this event is going to be taking place May 1st through 6th. With 16 teams and the prize pool being built up to $250,000. So it's going to be a bigger event than what it was last year, which is already pretty huge. We also had some qualifiers being announced for the event for Europe and North America. Qualifiers in both regions are going to have a 2-step open and closed qualifier process, limited amount of teams in the open process, and then the finalists will make it onto the closed stage against 6 invited teams. And they'll play in a single elimination best-of-3 bracket, and only the winners of each region will guarantee slots. So these are going to produce 1 slot apiece, and we'll keep you updated on more information when it comes to more team invites and more qualification information as it comes to us. Then we have another bigger tournament coming up here in the CSGO scene this week with the V4 Future Sports Festival coming up in Budapest, which will run from March 23rd to March 25th. It's going to have nearly $600,000 on the line, split among all the participants. It's going to be a round-robin group stage system with 2 teams advancing to a single elimination bracket. Teams at attendance for this event will be some big names like FaZe, Hellraiser, Smile Sports, and Virtus Pro. Also some smaller, more local teams, which are going to include Game Agents, which is actually from Hungary, as well as Exotis, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, sorry, the Dark Tigers and XCOM team. Talent has also been released, as the duos will be Anders and Moses, Sadicus and Henry G, and Tom Biz and Hugo. And then we'll also have on the analyst desk Thorin, Yanko, and Drowlin, which is cool to see him. He's been doing a lot of content, interviews, talk shows. He is from Hungary himself, and so it's going to be cool to get to see him get an opportunity to do an analyst desk gig. So shout out to him. Definitely someone I've talked to, work with in the past. Really cool guy, and it's cool to see him get his chance. And this should be a pretty fun tournament to follow this next week. There's also going to be another tournament coming up this week to go alongside the V4 tournament, which is going to be an invitational between Starladder and IMBAtv. It's going to be an $150,000 tournament. 8 teams are going to be involved, all of which were invited. It's going to run from March 22nd to 25th. It's going to be run in China, and it's going to be including the teams Vega Squadron, Spirit, AGO, Tyloo, Flash, MVP PK, Boot Dreamscape, and SZ Absolute. Should be a fun tournament to get to see some of these teams from the Asian region play against each other offline, and includes a little bit of a flavor from CIS with Vega Squadron and Spirit, as well as AGO from Poland. So these teams, of course, having just played over at WESG, so they'll get another chance right away at trying to improve their stock, get some more prize money in their wallets, and as well as just try to show themselves off to the world and let you know what kind of teams that they are. So this should be a pretty cool event to keep an eye on. Heading back over to North America, we've had several teams that are struggling in the region's pro leagues making some roster changes. First up, we have Exceed being removed from Dignitas. Now this is of course after them having already had to make a roster change because Snakes was too young to compete, and so they had to bring in Mitch. Now they've also removed Exceed. This is after a 0-6 start in EPL and an inability to qualify for ECS Season 5. We saw them playing with Connor93 at the iBUYPOWER Invitational this past weekend. Things did not go so well for them there. And it's also reported that they do have some interest in Caboose. This comes from the dusT2.us site. So we will have to keep our eye on Dignitas and see how exactly they want to change up their roster. We've also had Splyce make some moves after apparently Roca failed to come to an agreement with the Splyce organization on a contract extension. So we saw Splyce using a proto as a stand-in at the iBUYPOWER Invitational. Of course, this is a former CLG Academy member who played alongside Exotic, so there is a little bit of a connection there. But they've also mentioned on the dusT US article that they might be interested in Cutler, who of course is a former CLG member who's been playing with Ronin over at Mountain Dew League. And of course, Splyce have had their struggles. They are 3-7 in EPL, and they did not qualify for ECS Season 5, losing in the Challengers Cup to Rogue in Team 1. And so it seemed like they were still having some issues they needed to resolve. And so this is what we're left with. So we'll have to keep an eye and see what final decision Splyce makes on their lineup. And then finally, we had gosT making a change as they had removed Connor, who of course we just saw standing in for Dignitas, and they decided to replace him with former Rise Nation in-game leader VSA. And this is now the third change that gosT Gaming has made in the last couple of months, as of course they had already added Sub Rosa and Stanley from the UK before EPL kicked off. And VSA had been teamless after he got benched by Rise Nation when they brought in guys like Dapper and Relics, who of course now moved on to the United organization. And so VSA was kind of a free agent floating out there, and he has now been picked up by gosT, and he helped them get their first 2 wins in the league against Splyce just last week. And definitely seems to maybe be a good addition to this team. Of course, gosT really struggled last season, and many of these teams have been struggling really over the past couple of years in the NA region. So they're hoping that maybe these changes will finally be what they need to kind of increase their stock a little bit and get them to where they want to be. But of course, we will keep you updated as these moves either get finalized or different moves get made instead. Last week, we also got some more news about the CSGO Players Union as it's continuing to officially come together. They've already been doing work together for about a year or so, maybe even longer, and they've been trying to form for quite some time. But we had a report from Liz Mullen over at the Sports Business Journal to get a little bit more information about the CSGO Players Union, which apparently already has 70 players signed up with membership letters with the group. It's going to be called the Counter-Strike Professional Players Association. It's going to be headed, of course, by Scott Smith, also known as Sir Scoots. And, of course, the association has been collecting members over the past few months to officially form. But according to Sir Scoots, they're not going to do the official United States law route of getting, authorization cards, but membership letters instead, because many of the people are, of course, going to be coming from Europe. And so they're going about it a different way. Of course, we had been hearing about this group for quite some time, and they had made a big splash earlier in 2017 due to the whole PEA situation, which I'm not really going to get into here. It's a very long story. Definitely go look it up if you are interested more in about this and you have no idea what I'm talking about. But essentially, the basics of it was that it was a league that was going to be coming together for CSGO, with many of the North American organizations, owners, and such being a part of making it come together. But then there was a stipulation that seemed as though they wouldn't be able to compete in the PEA as well as still compete in the ESL Pro League, and a lot of players were not happy about that, and that caused them to kind of move against the concept. And ultimately the PEA CSGO League did not happen. We also had a lot of other repercussions suffered from that. TSM basically dropped their CSGO team because of a disagreement between Sean Gares and TSM's owner, and there was just a lot involved in that, so I don't want to get into it much more than I already have. But again, we've already seen some things from this association already, and now they're going to be officially organizing, and apparently they've already begun speaking with tournament organizers about player needs and conditions for future tournaments and leagues and things of that such. So they're starting to mobilize and really get some weight behind them, and so we'll definitely keep you updated as we get more information about the formation of this new association here for the professional CSGO players. Now, last but not least, we got a little bit more information about the whole G2 situation going on, as of course we had already talked about here on the Rapid Recap in a previous episode that it was announced that Mixwell would be coming in, that MBK will be taking up IGL duties, that Shox, of course, was going to be doing his wrist surgery, but his non-inclusion in this new lineup was not because of the wrist surgery, it's because he didn't want to be a part of this new lineup, and he had different ideas in mind on what he wanted to happen for G2. And of course, Smith stepping down from the coach role, wanting to be a player again. And again, we talked about this in greater detail in a previous episode, but now we got more information, as Shox was actually on a podcast on G2's Twitch channel, And he revealed what his plan actually was for G2, because there was a lot of speculation on, well, what did Shox want? Why was it not accepted? Because obviously G2's CEO Ocelot had come out and done a video basically said that they didn't want to go at Shox's more drastic changes. They wanted to trial Mixwell. They wanted to give MBK a shot at in-game leading, see how that went, and then from there make decisions. And they made it very clear that Shox could still play for G2 again in the future. It's just he wouldn't be a part of this current lineup. And probably if he did play for G2 again in the future, it would be with another lineup that he wanted to do, his more drastic ideas coming through. So it's kind of a trial period going on, right? And according to Shox, he said that he wanted to remove NBK and Apex and wanted to add Existence as an in-game leader and have Smith's return as a rifler, maybe more of a supportive rifler, definitely not doing the op because he wanted to retain Kenny S. And so the core of this team would have been apparently Shox, Existence, Kenny S, Smith, and I think he also wanted to keep Body. However, apparently Body did not trust in this project is what he was quoted as saying, and so it didn't really come together. And again, it seemed like the G2 organization wanted to try other things first. And then we did have Shox going on to admit that, of course, the team had several different issues inside and outside of the game, and that he was a part of that, and he was to blame for some of it. And I'll go ahead and read you some quotes from him now that came from this podcast. And he says, quote, "I tried to change positions and roles when I believed we were not approaching things the right way. Perhaps sometimes I tried to change things too much and the players were kind of lost. Maybe I did not speak enough to them to make sure they were on my side. I'm not pointing fingers. In my opinion, the team did not fit together, so it was not like changing one player would make things better. I believe we did not have the same vision for the game. We were maybe too different outside the game. We did not have great chemistry, balance inside the game, or communication. There were a lot of things." Now, of course, he is going to be stepping away to do a wrist surgery soon, and we're not sure how long that's going to prevent him from playing. But once he does recover from this wrist surgery, depending on how this G2 lineup goes with the trial of Mixwell, we could see Shox return, and maybe these changes would actually come through, and we would see the return of Existence to a top French team. Or perhaps, maybe, we could see, a guy like Shox sold off and Smith sold off, and they go decide to make a team with Existence, including maybe other players from the region. So certainly this is nice to see some more information coming out about this whole situation, and it'll certainly be an interesting story to follow going forward. So there you have it, folks. This is this week's edition of the Rapid Recap. We hope you enjoyed. Again, this is a newer series for us, so we're still experimenting and taking feedback and trying to improve the show going forward. So certainly, if you have any comments, be sure to drop them below. Also, if you enjoy this content, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Also, give a follow to myself and Rivalry over on the social media, and definitely stay updated as we do a lot of content over here at Rivalry, particularly with all esports, but also really focused on CSGO. And so, again, we hope to see you next time.